My name is Karen Whitmore. I am 68 years old, and I spent most of my life teaching English at a small high school tucked between pine trees and a quiet lake. I thought I understood human nature after decades of guiding teenagers through storms of their own making, but nothing prepared me for the day my husband's funeral opened a door I never knew existed. I am telling my story because if you have ever felt unheard, overlooked, or quietly dismissed in your own family, you deserve to know you are not alone. And if my voice reaches you today, I hope you will follow this channel so we can walk through the difficult parts of life together. That morning, the church lights were dimmed to a soft gold, the kind that sinks into the skin and makes everything feel slower. I chose the second pew instead of the front, not because I wanted to hide, but because the first seat beside Dan's framed photo felt unbearably empty. People often assume age brings strength, but in that moment, I felt as fragile as thin glass. The hymn rose around me, warm and familiar, but it could not settle the strange tension I sensed moving just beneath the sorrow. The service should have been about Dan, yet I noticed how easily the room shifted its attention toward my son and his wife. Sam stood tall, shoulders squared as if giving a performance, and Ivy kept touching his arm with a polished gentleness that felt rehearsed. Several guests approached them first, offering condolences as if they were the central figures in this loss. When they finally reached me, Ivy pressed my hands between hers and said in a soft tone that carried more pity than comfort, "You must rest, Karen. You've been through so much." Rest. That word landed like a bruise. I had not fallen apart, yet they treated me as though my thoughts should be handled with gloves. While the minister spoke, I watched Sam answer his phone. He stepped away from the pews, whispering something sharp and impatient. It lasted only seconds, but the look on his face did not belong to a grieving son. It was a look I knew from long ago, the look he used to give when he was cornered and needed to lie his way out. A mother never forgets that expression, even when she spends years hoping it will fade. He returned to his seat with a steady breath, touched Ivy's shoulder, and folded his hands. If I had blinked, I might have missed the stiffness in his jaw. Something in him was already moving ahead, as if this funeral were only one stop in a larger plan. After the final prayer, people lined up to speak with me. Their voices blurred into one gentle hum. "He was a good man. He loved you dearly. You were a wonderful couple." I nodded, grateful for their kindness, but I felt strangely outside my own body, as if I were watching myself from across the aisle. My heart ached for Dan, but beneath that grief lay a faint, cold thread of unease. It tugged at me with every passing minute. When the crowd thinned, I walked toward the framed photo beside the casket. Dan wore his favorite navy jacket in that picture, the one he kept for special days. I remember touching the sleeve that morning and whispering his name, asking for some sign that I would know how to live without him. I expected silence. Instead, I felt a shiver of something I could not name. I brushed it aside, telling myself it was only grief taking strange shapes. Sam came to stand beside me. "Mama, let's get you home," he said. His voice was soft, but not warm. There was distance in it, something guarded and oddly formal. "You shouldn't stay too long. Everyone's worried." Everyone. That word again, as if a meeting had been held without me, and the verdict had already been decided. Karen is delicate. Karen is confused. Karen needs guidance. I wanted to tell him I was still here, still whole, still the woman who raised him. Instead, I only nodded. Grief makes you choose silence, even when your mind is clear. As we stepped out of the chapel, A breeze swept through the courtyard and carried a faint scent of lilies. I paused to breathe it in, letting the air settle the weight in my chest. People walked past, their shadows stretching across the stone walkway. A few offered warm smiles, but many looked at me with the hushed reverence reserved for those believed to be fading. It was both comforting and suffocating. On the drive to Ivy's planned gathering, I stared out the window and watched the houses blur by. I felt as if the world had subtly shifted to a place where I no longer held the same ground I once did. That empty seat in the church had said more than any eulogy. It reminded me that absence can echo louder than presence. And something else echoed too, something that would not quiet down. The way Sam had stepped aside to answer that call. The tension in his voice, the way he glanced over his shoulder as though checking whether I had seen him. Later, I would look back at that moment and understand it was the first sign that my husband's death was not the beginning of closure, but the opening of a hidden door. But at the time, all I knew was an uneasy truth settling in my bones. My son was carrying a secret, and I could feel it waiting, like a shadow just out of sight. Before I continue, if you are still here, let me tell you this. Stories like mine unfold quietly at first, almost softly, until the moment they finally reveal what has been waiting beneath the surface. If you want to follow this journey all the way through, I hope you will subscribe so we can keep walking together. My story truly began only a few hours later, with a phone call that changed everything. Ivy's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a place where the lawns were trimmed with the kind of precision that suggested performances rather than comfort. When I stepped through her doorway, the scent of lemon polish and warm bread drifted toward me. It should have felt welcoming, but the air carried an edge I could not name, as if the whole space had been arranged for a photograph rather than a family gathering. I folded my hands and reminded myself that grief made everything feel sharper than it really was. Still, something in my chest whispered caution. "Karen, come in, please," Ivy said, touching my elbow with a practiced gentleness. Her voice flowed smoothly, like someone who had rehearsed every syllable. "I made a little lunch so you don't have to think about anything. Just sit, rest, and let us take care of you." There was that word again, rest, as though I had lost the ability to stand on my own 2 feet. The dining table was already set with quiche, salads, and small pastries. Silverware glimmered beneath the chandelier. A few neighbors were seated along the edges, murmuring soft condolences. I thanked them, but I felt more like a guest of honor at an event planned without my consent. Sam hovered near the kitchen doorway, glancing down at his phone every few seconds. When he finally looked up at me, he smiled, but it was the kind of smile a person uses when they hope it will disguise something else. I sat at the head of the table. It should have been a place of respect, yet it felt more like a position of containment. Ivy poured me tea, stirring honey into it without asking how I preferred it. "You look tired," she said quietly. "You've carried so much alone these past years. Dan meant the world to you, but he didn't always make things easy." I watched her hands moving over the teacup, smooth, steady, deliberate. "Marriage isn't always easy," I answered. "But it was ours." She smiled gently. "Of course. I only mean you shouldn't have to go through the next steps by yourself. There's so much paperwork, and the house is large for one person. It might be a good time to simplify things. Maybe think about options." Options. The word fell between us like a stone. She pretended to add more salad to her plate so she could keep her tone light. There are wonderful senior living communities now. Very supportive. very safe. You'd have company, activities, help on hand. And I know you've been misplacing things lately. Keys, envelopes, those sorts of things. It happens to the best of us. A soft laugh slipped from her. Too soft, too sweet. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the plate. I haven't thought about moving, I said carefully. That's why Sam and I want to help, she replied. We want the best for you. Her words were honeyed, but they clung to me like cobwebs. Before I could respond, Sam's phone buzzed. He stepped away from the table, his hand tightening around the device. The moment he pressed it to his ear, his voice dropped to a clipped whisper. No, not today. I told you I'd handle it. Just wait. Each word snapped in the air like a taut wire. The room fell strangely still, though the neighbors continued murmuring about the service. Ivy's fork paused mid-air. She didn't look at him, which told me she already knew what the call was about. When Sam returned, he forced another smile, the same strained expression he'd worn at the church. Sorry about that, he said, sitting beside Ivy. A work thing. He reached for his glass, but his hand trembled slightly before he brought it to his lips. Only a mother notices tremors like that. I sipped my tea and tasted sweetness I had not asked for. My mind drifted back to the church, to the way Sam's jaw had locked when he answered that earlier call. The same tension flickered now, like a warning light behind his eyes. I wanted to ask him what was wrong. I wanted to reach out and take his hand the way I used to when he was small and frightened. But something told me this fear was not about losing a father. It was about something he had done, or something he was planning to do. The conversation around the table rolled on. Neighbors discussed the weather, shared stories of Dan's kindness, and offered comfort I appreciated more than I could express. Yet beneath their warmth, I felt the careful watchfulness of Ivy and the restless silence of my son. Every so often, Ivy placed a hand on Sam's arm, a quiet signal. Not comfort, control. When the meal ended, Ivy guided me toward the living room with a softness that felt like a veil draped over something sharp. She invited me to sit on the couch, brought me a blanket without asking, and tucked it around my legs as if I were a child. It's been such a long day, she murmured. You shouldn't drive home alone later. You've been forgetting small things lately. It's understandable. And we just want you safe. Safe. The word slid across my skin in a way that made my breath catch. I appreciate your concern, I said. But I drove myself here. I'm capable of driving back. Ivy's smile froze for half a heartbeat before she softened it again. Of course, just think about what I said earlier, about simplifying things. A community might be exactly what you need. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes held a quiet calculation. I stood, adjusting the blanket aside. Thank you for lunch, truly, but I think I'll head home now. Sam appeared from the kitchen doorway. I'll walk you to your car, he offered, voice stiff. Outside, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the driveway. Sam stopped beside my car and rubbed his thumb over his phone screen. Mom? He said quietly, not meeting my eyes. It might be a good idea to let us help you with things for a while. Help me with what? He hesitated. Just things. You've been under stress. People worry. People. Not him. Not Ivy. People. I'm still myself, Sam, I said. Don't forget that. For the first time that day, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, guilt, maybe both. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the door. Drive safe. Mom! I sat behind the wheel, gripping it a moment before turning on the engine. The house shrank in my rearview mirror, but the sense of unease only grew. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief can twist shadows into threats. But even as the road unwound before me, I could not shake the weight of Sam's whispers or Ivy's careful words. Later that night, I would learn the truth behind those looks, the reason Sam kept stepping away, the meaning inside Ivy's gentle insistence. But for now, all I had was a quiet certainty settling into my bones, a certainty I could not explain. Their concern wasn't love. It was preparation. My phone rang long after I had settled into the quiet of my house, the kind of hour when even the walls seemed to breathe slower. I was still in the clothes I had worn to the service, sitting at the dining table with Dan's framed picture beside me, as if his steady eyes might keep me anchored. When the screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, I felt a small thud in my chest. I almost let it ring out, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Whitmore," a low voice said, steady but urgent. "This is Tom Avery. I was your husband's attorney for many years." I straightened, my fingers tightening around the phone. "Yes, I remember you." "I can't speak long," he said, "and I need you to listen carefully. Do not tell your son about this call, and don't wait. Come to my office now. You could be in danger." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The room tilted, the air thickening around me. Danger? Why? What is this about? "I'll explain when you arrive." His tone softened only by a fraction. "Please, trust me." The line clicked off before I could ask another question. I held the phone to my ear a moment longer, as if the silence might somehow reveal more. All I heard was my own heartbeat, heavy and uneven. I rose slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. The house felt too still, too expectant, as if the shadows were waiting for me to make a decision. I slipped on my coat, the same coat I had worn earlier, with a faint scent of the church clinging to it. My keys were in the bowl near the doorway. When I reached for them, I hesitated, remembering Ivy's remark about misplaced items. The memory burned sharper now. I opened the front door and paused on the porch. The night air wrapped around me, cool and dense. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice, then stopped. I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. Driving at night had never bothered me, but that evening, every intersection felt like an unspoken question. The roads were quiet, lined with houses where curtains were drawn and families were settling into their small routines. Every so often, I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights that weren't there. My mind replayed Tom's warning on a loop, each repetition tightening something inside me. When I reached the downtown building where Tom's office was located, the parking lot was nearly empty. Only a few street lamps cast pale light across the pavement. I parked near the entrance and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. The windows of the building glowed faintly, as if someone had left a few lights on for reasons that didn't match the late hour. Inside, the lobby was silent. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor as I approached the elevator. The doors slid open with a hollow chime, and I stepped in. As it rose, the soft hum of the machinery filled the small space, steady but strangely unsettling. On the third floor, the hallway stretched out before me, lined with darkened offices. Tom's door was the only one with light beneath it. I approached slowly, my pulse tapping a dull rhythm against my ribs. When I knocked, the door opened almost instantly. Tom stood there, his face lined with a seriousness that went beyond grief. His eyes moved over me, checking for something I didn't understand. He stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this is a difficult day." I nodded, unsure if my voice would hold. You said I might be in danger. He closed the door quietly, almost gently. Yes, and I meant it. He walked toward his desk, where a single lamp cast a circle of light over a stack of papers. The rest of the room remained in partial shadow, as if even the walls understood the need for caution. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him. My legs felt stiff as I lowered myself into it. I'm going to tell you something, he said, settling into his own chair. And it may be difficult to hear, but it is important that you hear it from someone who has nothing to gain and every reason to protect you. His words pressed against the quiet of the room. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady them. What is going on? He drew in a slow breath. Your husband left something behind, something he intended for me to give you only under specific circumstances. And those circumstances are now. A chill moved through me, sharp and immediate. Why didn't he tell me? Tom looked down, hesitating. Because he believed you were being watched, followed, manipulated. He thought that speaking to you openly would put you at risk. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Watched? By whom? His eyes met mine across the desk, and in that instant I understood his earlier warning. By your son, he said quietly, and by his wife. There are things you don't know yet, things your husband discovered before the end. I stared at him, the words landing like blows I could not defend myself from. Sam would never harm me. I believe you want to think that, Tom said gently. But your husband found evidence that suggested otherwise, and there's more he left behind for you. But before I show you anything, I need to be certain you understand the gravity of this situation. My throat tightened. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I thought of Sam's tense whispers at the church, the nervous grip on his phone, Ivy's careful insistence that I rest and let them handle things, signs I had dismissed as grief, signs that now stood in sharper light. I sat frozen in the chair across from Tom, the lamplight casting a pale circle between us. My hands were clasped so tightly my knuckles ached, but I didn't loosen them. The room felt as if it had been sealed away from the world, soundless except for the faint hum of the building's old heating system. I could hear my own breathing more clearly than I could hear Tom, even though he was only a few feet away. When he reached for a thick folder on his desk, my stomach tightened. Before you look at this, he said, sliding the folder toward me, I want you to know something clearly. Your husband trusted you more than anyone in his life. Everything he did, everything he found, every step he took, he did to protect you. He never doubted your strength. Not once. My eyes stung. Then why didn't he tell me what he discovered? He didn't want you to react emotionally in front of the wrong person, Tom answered. He believed someone close to you was testing your boundaries, watching for any sign of confusion or vulnerability. If he told you everything and you confronted them, they might have used that reaction against you. The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, nodding slowly, though my thoughts were tangled. The folder lay untouched between us. A part of me wanted to push it away and walk out the door, pretend this conversation had never happened. But another part, the part that had felt uneasy since the morning, knew the time for pretending had passed. Please open it, Tom said gently. With trembling fingers, I lifted the cover. The first page was a handwritten log, dated over several months. Dan's handwriting, steady and familiar. Each entry carried a cool precision. Times, locations, conversations he overheard, notes about phone calls Sam had taken late at night. Every line felt like a quiet wound. He had been gathering information without telling me, moving through our home with a heavy secret lodged inside him. I turned the page, and a stack of printed documents appeared beneath. Financial statements, deposits, and withdrawals that didn't match anything I recognized. Several were in my name, but I had never signed or authorized them. A hollow ache spread through my chest. "These are photocopies," Tom said. "Your husband saved the originals in a secure place. We'll retrieve them later, but for now, I want you to see enough to understand the pattern." I lifted one page. A credit line increase filed under my name. Another page, an insurance inquiry. And another, a power of attorney form with my information at the top. My breath caught when I saw the signature line. My name had been signed in a shaky, imitated script, then crossed out with a thick black pen. "That," Tom said quietly, "is the part your husband refused to sign. Someone tried to push it through anyway." "Someone," I whispered. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "He confronted your son about it once," Tom continued. "Not directly. Dan was careful. But he asked a few questions that made Sam nervous. After that, the pressure increased. Phone calls, meetings, subtle comments to your neighbors about your health." I closed the folder and pressed my hand against the cover. My heartbeat hammered through my fingertips. "I can't believe Sam would do this." "Grief blinds us," Tom said. "But your husband wasn't blinded. And he wasn't careless." He reached for a small device on his desk, an audio recorder. He pressed a button, and a familiar voice filled the quiet office. Dan's voice. My breath hitched. "Tom," the recording began, steady and calm. "If you're hearing this, something has changed. I don't know how far they'll go. But Karen cannot face this alone. I've seen enough to know she's at risk. Sam is not thinking clearly. Ivy is pushing him. I'm gathering everything I can. Protect her." I covered my mouth with my hand as the recording ended. My eyes burned, but I kept them fixed on the desk. I didn't want Tom to see how deeply the words had cut. "He recorded that 2 months ago," Tom said softly. "And he meant every word." I forced myself to look up. "What exactly does he expect me to do?" "Right now," Tom answered, "I need you to understand the situation clearly so you can make informed decisions. But there's something else you need to know." He stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a sealed envelope. He handed it to me. The flap was marked with today's date. "Your husband left this for you. He told me to give it to you only if certain signs appeared." My hand shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter in Dan's handwriting. The message was brief, but every word was etched with urgency. "Karen, if you're reading this, it means the danger I feared has come closer than I hoped. I didn't want to burden you, but I couldn't leave you unprotected. Go with Tom. Listen to him. He'll show you what I found. And trust your instincts. You've always had stronger ones than you believe." I lowered the letter slowly. My breath came uneven, but a strange steadiness began to rise through the shock. I had always thought of myself as someone who felt rather than fought. But in that moment, something in me shifted, like a quiet door opening inside my chest. "Tom," I said, "there's something I need to know. Why did Sam show up at your office today? Did he know I was coming here?" Tom studied me for a moment before answering. "I don't think he knew, but he suspects his father left something behind. When he heard I contacted you, he panicked." "Contacted me?" I asked slowly. "But you didn't call me earlier today." Tom's expression tightened. "No, I didn't." A cold shiver ran through me. Someone had called me from a strange number hours earlier. Someone who sounded urgent, insistent. pushing me to move quickly, someone who was not Tom. The room seemed to tilt, a slow, spiraling motion that pulled the breath from my lungs. The danger wasn't waiting in the shadows. It was already in motion. Tom's office felt smaller than it had moments earlier, as if the walls had quietly shifted inward the second I realized the first phone call hadn't come from him. A cool, prickling awareness moved across my shoulders. I folded Dan's letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, trying to keep my breath steady. Tom watched me with a concern that felt genuine. But concern wasn't enough to settle the unease curling in my stomach. Before either of us could speak, a knock burst against the office door. Sharp, urgent, too familiar. Tom stiffened. I felt the air pull tight inside the room. He opened the door only a few inches. But the moment I saw the figures in the hallway, my heart sank. Sam stood there, his jaw tense, eyes flickering between me and the light spilling from Tom's office. Ivy hovered behind him, her smile polite but strained, as if she were balancing two masks at once. A small part of me wanted to believe they had come out of worry, but a deeper instinct, one sharpened by a lifetime of knowing my son's moods, told me otherwise. "Mom," Sam said, stepping forward. "What are you doing here? We were looking for you." His voice trembled ever so slightly, not with fear, but with the kind of pressure that comes from trying to control a situation already slipping away. Tom didn't open the door any wider. "Mrs. Whitmore is here to discuss her husband's estate. It's a private meeting." I stepped closer, wanting to see their faces clearly. Sam looked irritated, caught off guard. Ivy, however, was composed, too composed. She gave me a soft smile, tilting her head just enough to mimic empathy. "We were worried about you, Karen. You left the lunch so suddenly. And after the service, well, we just thought it wasn't safe for you to be out alone." "Safe?" I repeated quietly. "You've been forgetful lately," Ivy continued, her tone warm but edged with something sharper. "Even the neighbors mentioned it. We just don't want anything to happen to you." Tom spoke before I could answer. "Mrs. Whitmore is perfectly capable of being here. You weren't invited to this meeting." Sam bristled. "I'm her son. I have every right to know what's going on." My heart tugged painfully at the word son. I had carried him, raised him, loved him through mistakes I never spoke of to anyone. I had smoothed over his missteps, defended him when he didn't deserve it, and waited through long stretches of silence when he didn't call. Now he stood before me with that same sharpness I had sensed at the funeral, an edge that didn't look like grief at all. "Sam," I said softly, "why did you come here?" His eyes darted to the folder on Tom's desk. The reaction was quick, too quick to hide. His breath caught, and for a moment, the veneer cracked. We needed to check on you," he said. "Ivy thought you shouldn't be making decisions alone today. You're overwhelmed." "I'm grieving," I corrected. "Not incapable." A flicker of defensiveness crossed his face. "That's not what I meant." But it was exactly what he meant, or at least what he wanted others to believe. Ivy stepped closer, placing her hand on Sam's arm. "Karen, this isn't the time to be dealing with documents. It's too soon. You need rest, and you shouldn't be pressured into anything." Her words flowed smoothly, polished like glass. But her eyes betrayed her. They kept drifting toward the folder, the envelope, the desk, objects she couldn't quite hide her interest in. Tom cleared his throat. "This meeting is not about pressuring anyone. It's about informing Mrs. Whitmore of information her husband entrusted to me." He stepped slightly in front of the desk, blocking their view. "If you have concerns, you can schedule a separate appointment. Sam's jaw clenched so tight I could see a muscle flicker beneath his skin. "We're not leaving her alone with you." "Sam," I said, more firmly now, "please step back." He looked at me then, really looked. And what I saw was not sorrow. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being exposed. Fear of something he and Ivy had begun long before today. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. "Mom, you don't know what you're getting into." A shiver ran through me, not from the words themselves, but from the way he said them. Not protective, not loving, warning, or perhaps something darker. I drew a slow breath. "Then let me understand it." Tom sensed the moment shift. "Mrs. Whitmore needs space," he said firmly. "This conversation is private. I'll have to ask you both to step out." For an instant, no one moved. Sam's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Ivy's hand tightened around his arm. Then she leaned in and murmured something to him, too low for me to hear, but her gaze never left the folder. Whatever she said made Sam exhale sharply. "Fine," he muttered. "But we're not going far." As they turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something raw in Sam's expression. A quick, involuntary flicker when Tom mentioned records earlier. It was small, but it pierced through the veil of pretense. Something he feared was in that folder. Something he didn't want me to see. Tom closed the door once they stepped into the hallway. The click echoed more loudly than it should have. He turned back to me, lowering his voice. "That reaction," he said, "is exactly why your husband came to me." I nodded slowly. My breath steadied, not because the danger was gone, but because the truth, whatever it was, had finally begun to reveal its edges. "I think," I said quietly, "it's time you showed me everything." Tom didn't answer right away. He studied me for a long moment, his expression tightening in a way that made the air feel heavier. Then he walked to the far corner of the room and shut the blinds, leaving only the desk lamp glowing between us. The room dimmed, shadows stretching across the floor like long, quiet warnings. "Karen," he said, turning back to me, "what you're about to see will change everything you thought you knew about the last few months of your life." My breath stilled. The sentence hung between us, too calm, too deliberate. He motioned for me to stand. "You should be sitting closer to the back door, in case you need to leave quickly." His voice was steady, but the caution in it chilled me. I moved slowly toward the small couch against the wall. My hands felt strangely cold, as if my body knew something I did not. Tom crossed the room, unlocked a side cabinet, and pulled out a metal box. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a Bible, with Dan's initials engraved in a corner. My throat tightened at the sight. I hadn't known this existed. "He asked me to keep this hidden," Tom said. "He didn't even tell me what was inside. He only said it had to stay sealed until the right moment." "And this is the moment?" I asked quietly. Tom nodded. He placed the box on the desk and opened the latches. The soft click of metal echoed through the room. Inside, instead of papers, instead of evidence, instead of anything I might have guessed, there was only a small handkerchief folded neatly over what looked like fabric. A jacket sleeve. Navy blue. Dan's navy jacket. My breath trembled. "Why is that here?" I whispered. Tom didn't answer. He stepped aside. "Karen, someone needs to speak to you." A soft sound came from the doorway behind me. A cough. Quiet. Familiar. Impossibly familiar. My entire body went still. I turned slowly, my vision blurring at the edges even before I saw him. Dan stood in the doorway, alive. My knees weakened, and I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. For a heartbeat, I thought I might collapse. For another, I thought this must be grief taking shape, a cruel hallucination. But he stepped forward and his shadow moved across the floor. His eyes, tired, steady, achingly real, found mine. "Karen," he said quietly. The room spun. My hand rose to my mouth, but no sound came out. I felt the air rush from my lungs in a single disbelieving gasp. He moved toward me slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. When he reached the couch, he knelt in front of me, his hands trembling. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I couldn't speak. My mind clawed at 1,000 impossible questions, but none of them could take shape. I reached out with a shaking hand and touched his cheek. Warm, alive, real. "Dan," I finally managed, but the word cracked in the middle. How is this possible?" He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against my knee like a man who had carried too much weight alone. "I didn't die," he said. "I couldn't. Not when I realized what was happening." I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "You let me think you were gone." He winced. "I had no choice. If I told you, if I warned you, they would have seen it in your face. They were already watching you, testing you, setting things up piece by piece." My pulse surged with anger and relief and heartbreak tangled together. "You lied to me," I whispered. "You let me bury you." "I know," he said, voice breaking. "I know what I put you through, and if there had been another way, I would have taken it. I'm so sorry, Karen, but the danger was real and closer than you knew." I shook my head slowly, trying to steady my breath. "Explain. All of it." Tom stepped back, giving us space. Dan sat beside me, still holding my hand as if afraid I would disappear. "It started 6 months ago," he said. "I noticed irregular withdrawals from one of our accounts. At first, I thought it was a banking error. But then I realized the withdrawals were linked to Sam. Not directly, but through small transfers that looked like nothing on their own. I confronted him lightly, just to see his reaction. He denied everything, but his behavior changed. My stomach clenched. "And Ivy?" Dan let out a slow breath. "She encouraged him. She told him you were getting older, that our assets should be secured before something happened to you. She said it was responsible planning. But when I looked deeper, I realized they weren't planning for the future. They were planning around you." A cold wave rippled through me. "I kept digging," he continued. "I found meetings with a doctor, a man named Victor Sloan. I didn't know what they were discussing until I intercepted a message. They wanted a medical evaluation, one that would say you were unfit to manage your own affairs." I felt the room blur for a moment, my breath catching painfully. Dan tightened his grip on my hand. I tried to confront them quietly. I went to Tom. I asked for help gathering proof, but the more I learned, the clearer it became that they were moving faster than I could stop them. "So you staged your death?" I said, the words tasting like ash. He nodded. "Eddie helped me. I had done him a favor years ago. He agreed to set everything up so it looked official. The doctor signed the documents without question. He'd already been paid enough times. The moment I was declared gone, I could work without being seen, without being a target. Tom would keep you safe while I finished collecting everything." A sharp ache spread through my chest. "You left me alone." "It broke me to do it," he said. "But I thought it was the only way to protect you. I thought I had more time before they made their move. I didn't know they were already pushing you, already trying to isolate you. I covered my face with my hands, let the tears fall through my fingers, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of everything shifting so fast. Dan touched my shoulder gently. I understand if you can't forgive me. I understand if you need time, but I'm here now, and I won't leave again, not until you're safe. I lowered my hands and looked at him. The man I had mourned just hours earlier, the man who had stepped into his own shadow so I could live untouched by someone else's plan. The room was spinning less now. A strange clarity settled over me, like a calm rising from deep inside. You can't undo what happened, I said, but you can help me understand what comes next. Dan nodded, relief softening his face. Tom stepped forward again, resting his hand on the metal box. What comes next, he said quietly, is the part your husband couldn't handle alone. I took a breath, a steady one this time. Then let's begin. The next hour unfolded in a way that felt both painfully slow and brutally fast, as if my mind and my heartbeat were moving at different speeds. Tom closed the metal box, setting it aside with a care that told me this was only the beginning of what Dan had hidden. Dan pulled a chair next to mine, his presence solid, even though I still questioned everything I saw, everything I touched. I kept glancing at him, half afraid he would vanish if I blinked too long. Tom dimmed the overhead lights and switched on a small desk lamp angled toward a stack of materials he had arranged earlier, materials I had barely noticed when I first arrived. Now he spread them out like pieces of a puzzle that had waited too long to be assembled. Your husband gathered these over several months, Tom said. He wanted everything documented, everything time-stamped, everything preserved in case something happened to him. He paused. In case someone made something happen. I felt Dan shift beside me. His fingers grazed mine, a small gesture that steadied my breath. Tom began laying out the first set of items, printed photos, screenshots, receipts, and small slips of paper with Dan's handwriting. The desk was quickly covered in fragments of a truth I had never imagined existed. The first photograph caught my eye. Sam standing outside a casino, his posture tense, his hand gripping his phone. The timestamp read 2 weeks before Dan's supposed death. I stared at it, my throat tightening. He told me he was at a work seminar that night, I said softly. Dan nodded. I know. I checked the hotel he said he'd stayed at. He never checked in. Tom slid another image forward. This one showed Ivy inside a jewelry store, speaking with a clerk, pointing to a bracelet displayed in a glass case. She looked calm, polished, almost radiant. My name was printed on the receipt beside the photo. Karen Whitmore, paid in full. Except, I had never bought such a thing, and certainly not for myself. A cold, almost metallic sensation crawled into my chest. Tom moved to the next stack. Your husband found patterns, small withdrawals from your joint account, ATM visits at odd hours, purchases made under your name but delivered to their home. He handed me a printed transaction report. My eyes traced the numbers, disbelief turning slowly into a heavy realization. I didn't authorize any of this, I said. Dan's voice was quiet, controlled. I know, that's why I started documenting everything. They were building a narrative, one where you looked inconsistent, disorganized. They wanted to show a pattern. My pulse stumbled. A pattern of what? Tom answered for him. A pattern of declining ability. They needed enough little irregularities to convince a court that you were unfit to manage your own affairs. I swallowed hard. The edges of the room pressed inward slightly, but I forced myself to stay present, to keep looking. Tom pulled a laptop toward us and opened a folder labeled with Dan's initials. He recorded several audio notes. They're brief, but they explain what he was seeing. He clicked the first file. Dan's voice filled the room again, steady and analytical. Observed Sam withdraw cash from joint account. Amount small but repetitive. Calls with unknown number afterward. Tone aggressive. The next recording. Ivy asked Karen where she left her keys again. Karen didn't misplace them. I found them behind the ironing board. Someone moved them. My breath caught. Another recording. Heard doctor's name today. Sloan. Trying to confirm if he's meeting with them. I felt my nails press into my palms. Tom paused the audio. This is only part of what your husband compiled. He planned to organize everything into a final file, but he didn't finish before he had to disappear. Dan moved closer to the desk and lifted a small plastic bag containing a crumpled receipt. This one matters, he said. Look closely. The receipt was from a pharmacy. On the date printed at the top, Ivy had told me she spent the afternoon with her mother. But here was a purchase under her name for medication she insisted I had lost. The timestamp shattered her alibi entirely. I confronted the pharmacy clerk, Dan said. He remembered her. She was nervous, kept glancing at the clock. And this, Tom added, sliding a printed image across the table, is footage from the casino parking lot. Sam speaking with a man who has a known history of aggressive debt collection. The memory of Sam's tense phone calls at the funeral returned with a sudden, painful clarity. My chest felt hollow, but I leaned toward the desk. Show me all of it. Tom nodded. He moved through the pieces one by one. Screenshots of emails, copies of bank statements showing minor yet suspicious shifts, a sequence of late-night ATM photos, a voicemail from a neighbor gently asking if everything was all right because Sam had mentioned I seemed forgetful lately. Forgetful. That word had followed me like an invisible trail these past few weeks. Dan finally reached for the last item in the row, a torn corner of what looked like shredded paperwork. The edges were jagged, as if someone had fed the original into a shredder too quickly. This is what convinced me I had run out of time, he said. I found this in the trash outside their house. What was it? I asked. It was a bank statement, he replied. One in your name, with a signature that wasn't yours. I took a slow breath. The evidence before me didn't feel like a collection of papers anymore. It felt like a series of betrayals, each one cutting deeper. Tom gathered the materials into a careful pile. Your husband believed they were preparing to accelerate things. They needed you to appear unstable, confused, vulnerable. I thought of Ivy's soft insistence, her hands on my elbows, her suggestions about senior living, her comments about my memory, and Sam, his strange composure at the church, the urgency in his calls, the flicker of panic in his eyes when he saw Tom's folder. They wanted control, I whispered. Tom nodded. Complete control. Silence settled over the room, heavy and thick. I looked at Dan, the man I had buried 12 hours earlier, now sitting beside me with the weight of everything he had tried to shield me from. His eyes were tired, almost anguished. I'm sorry, he said softly. I wanted to protect you, but I couldn't do it alone. For the first time since he appeared in the doorway, my anger eased just slightly. Not because his choices hadn't hurt me, they had, but because the truth, as painful as it was, felt cleaner than the silence that came before it. I looked down at the table full of evidence, at the photos, the reports, the receipts. They underestimated me, I said quietly. Dan exhaled slowly. as if the words had lifted something from his chest. Tom leaned forward, his voice steady. "Are you ready to move to the next step?" I nodded. "Show me what we do now." Tom cleared a space on the desk, sweeping aside the photos and receipts until only a few pages remained. The room felt heavier now, not with fear, but with a growing clarity. Something inside me, something I had kept quiet for years, began to rise, slow and deliberate, like a tide reclaiming the shore. Dan watched me closely, his eyes searching for any sign that I might break. But I didn't break. I simply waited. "There's something you need to see next," Tom said, lifting a thin manila folder. His tone had changed. It was no longer tentative or cautious. It carried the weight of a truth he had rehearsed too many times. "This is the part your husband hoped you wouldn't have to face, but you must." He opened the folder and slid out a page. The moment my eyes touched it, my pulse stumbled. It was a medical evaluation form with my name at the top, my birth date, my address, and beneath it, a diagnosis I had never heard from any doctor: cognitive decline, early stage. A note recommending continued observation and intervention. I stared at it until the words blurred. "I never saw this," I whispered. "I know you didn't," Tom said. "Your husband found it in Dr. Sloane's office. He copied it before the doctor could lock it away." The doctor's name sat at the bottom of the page, signed with the kind of confidence only money can buy. Dan leaned closer. "I overheard them talking about getting this done without your knowledge. They needed a record, something they could point to if anyone questioned their intentions." Images flickered in my mind, moments I had brushed aside. Ivy insisting I'd misplaced my keys. Sam asking softly if I'd taken my medication. The envelope I never received, even though the mail carrier said it had been delivered. Each memory sharpened, aligning itself into a pattern I could finally see. "I wasn't losing things," I said quietly. "They were taking them." Dan nodded. "To create a trail." "And this report." I held up the page with unsteady hands. "They wanted to use this against me." Tom exchanged a look with Dan before answering. "Yes." A slow burn began deep in my chest. Not hot, not explosive, but steady. It grew stronger as Tom pulled out a second document. This one was a list of prescriptions. My name again, and a refill authorization I had never given. "They told the pharmacy you needed reminders," Tom said. "They said you forget doses, but your husband found the bottle they claimed was empty. It was full, untouched." I closed my eyes briefly. It was all there now, the edges of a trap built with small, careful pieces. A medication bottle placed in the wrong drawer, keys moved from one room to another, appointment reminders I supposedly forgot, even though no one ever told me. The room darkened slightly as Dan moved to the window and closed the blinds. When he returned, he sat across from me, his voice low. "Do you remember the night you couldn't find your house deed? The one you thought you misplaced after organizing the filing cabinet?" I felt the memory jolt through me like a flash of cold water. "Yes." "It wasn't misplaced. Ivy took it. She told Sam she'd return it once they had the rest of the documents in place." A sting moved behind my eyes, not because I was shocked, but because I finally understood the shape of their plan. It hadn't been rushed. It had been careful, patient, deliberate. Tom placed 2 photographs in front of me next. One showed Dr. Sloane leaving a restaurant. The second showed him shaking hands with Sam in the parking lot. "These were taken by someone I hired," Tom said. "Your husband insisted on having proof that couldn't be denied. That doctor accepted $10,000 in cash over several meetings. We have bank records, surveillance images, and a partial audio recording, enough to show intent. The air in the room felt warmer suddenly, as if the walls themselves leaned closer. I touched the photographs lightly. So they weren't planning to help me. They were planning to replace me. Dan's face tightened. They knew our assets were tied up. They knew the house was in your name. They needed you to appear unreliable so they could take control. And you found all of this, I said, turning to him. You carried it alone. He nodded. I tried to tell you without telling you. I tried to get you to stay with friends, to delay signing anything. But every time I hinted at trouble, they pushed harder. I was running out of time. I leaned back, letting my breath settle. The pain was still there, sharp, fresh, undeniable. But something else began to form beneath it. A kind of stillness, a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Karen, you're fragile. You forget things. You need guidance. You need rest. I heard every phrase in their voices, and instead of shrinking, something in me lifted its head. I'm not fragile, I said quietly. Dan looked at me, his eyes softening. Tom gave a single nod. There's more, but what you need to understand now is this. Everything they did was intentional. Every misplaced item, every suggestion about your memory, every time they told someone you needed help. He tapped the fake medical report. This document would have been the final push. For a moment, I felt the room fade at the edges, not from weakness, but from an overwhelming clarity. This wasn't grief clouding my mind. It wasn't confusion. It was a woman realizing how close she had come to losing everything while standing perfectly still. I looked at Dan, then at Tom, then at the evidence laid out before me. They wanted to rewrite my life, I said, but they didn't expect me to see the truth. Tom gathered the documents. And now that you do, we have a chance to stop them. I took a breath, steady and slow. Show me what comes next. When Tom finished gathering the documents, the room fell into a deep, almost echoing quiet. I rested my hands on my knees, grounding myself in the feeling of the fabric beneath my palms. Everything around me felt both sharp and distant. Dan breathing beside me, the hum of the desk lamp, the faint creak of the heating vents. It was as if the world had narrowed into a single truth. My own child had walked a path I never thought possible. Tom cleared his throat. There's one more thing you should understand before we plan our next move. It's about your son. I nodded. Tell me. Dan hesitated, exchanging a look with Tom. It wasn't uncertainty. It was concern, as if the next pieces of the story required care, even delicacy. I braced myself. Tom opened another folder, sliding a thin stack of printed screenshots and notes across the desk. These are records of Sam's financial activities over the last year. He tried to hide them, but he made mistakes. Transactions through smaller online platforms, short-term loans, a pattern of withdrawals linked to late-night activity. I stared at the sheets without touching them. The words on the pages, loan request, declined, pending, blurred slightly as my eyes struggled to keep still. How much does he owe? Dan lowered his head. About $160,000. The number landed like a weight on my chest. How? I asked quietly. He started gambling again, Dan said. Sports betting at first, then cards, high stakes. He won just enough times to believe he could outrun the losses, but he couldn't. And once he started losing big, he panicked. My fingertips tingled. I remembered the phone calls at the church, the tension in his jaw, the way he looked past me instead of at me. I had mistaken it for grief, for stress, But now the shape of it appeared fully. Desperation. Tom tapped a page near the top of the folder. He didn't just owe money. He owed the wrong people. Men who don't care about job titles, or families, or consequences. Men who expect repayment no matter the cost. A coldness settled under my ribs. Did anyone threaten him? Yes, Dan said. But he didn't come to us. He didn't ask for help. Instead, he looked for a shortcut. And he let Ivy convince him that you were the obstacle standing between him and the money he needed. My breath caught. Part hurt, part disbelief. I would have helped him, I whispered. Even if I disapproved, even if I was angry, I would have tried to help him. I'm his mother. Dan's voice softened. I know, but he wasn't thinking clearly. He let shame guide him instead of honesty. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the ache settle. Shame. It had swallowed him when he was a teenager too, when he wrecked his father's car and lied about it for weeks. He had always struggled to admit wrongdoing, always feared disappointing us more than anything else. I used to believe that fear came from love. Now I saw that part of it came from a weakness he had never learned to overcome. Tom placed another sheet in front of me. It was a printed transcript of a voicemail, transcribed by Dan. I recognized Sam's voice instantly, strained, tight, brittle. I told you I'd get the money, it read. Stop calling me at work. I said I'll fix it. I have a plan. Just give me time. A plan. The word cut deeper than any insult could have. I opened my eyes and looked at Dan. He thought using me was the only way. Dan nodded reluctantly. I overheard him one night. I was coming home late from a meeting with Tom. I heard him outside, near the driveway. He was on the phone saying he had something lined up. The next day, I found the first forged form. My chest tightened until it felt difficult to take a full breath. What about Ivy? How much of this was her idea? Tom answered. Enough that your husband believed she was driving most of the strategy. Sam was drowning. Ivy saw an opportunity. Together, they built a story that made your role look unstable. I felt something shift inside me then, not like before when hurt and shock pulled at my thoughts, but something calmer, colder, a clarity that did not feel cruel but necessary. Tell me the rest, I said. Dan leaned forward, lowering his voice. 2 days before I disappeared, I overheard Sam and Ivy arguing in their kitchen. She kept telling him he should have done more, that the longer Karen stays in that house, the harder it gets. She said they deserved security after everything they'd been through. She said no one would blame them if your memory slipped. The air left my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. Tom continued. Sam wanted out, but he didn't know how. Ivy kept pushing. She said no one would question a son taking care of his aging mother, that people would see it as responsible, compassionate, exactly the image they wanted. Responsible, compassionate. Words twisted into tools. I leaned back slowly, letting the truth settle into my bones. My hands were no longer trembling. The pain was still there, sharp, heavy, but something else had begun to rise in its place, a strange, steady resolve. What now? I asked. Dan sighed softly. Now you understand why he made the choices he made, not to excuse them, but to show you the full picture. I looked down at the papers again, Sam alone in a dark room. Sam speaking into his phone with a trembling voice. Sam pacing behind closed doors, trying to outrun consequences that were already closing in. I felt a pinch of sympathy, brief, human, inevitable, but it did not erase the harm he had meant to cause. He wasn't only hurting, I said quietly. He was hiding. Tom nodded. And now that you know what drove him, we can start preparing. But one thing is important. You cannot let either of them see any shift in your behavior, not yet. They must believe their plan is still steady. I straightened slightly. And you believe I can do that? Dan met my gaze with a softness that surprised me. You've always been stronger than you think. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for. His words landed gently, like a hand placed over a wound. I drew a slow breath and let it settle. Shame had pushed my son to the edge. Ambition had pulled my daughter-in-law into a strategy that threatened to erase me. But neither of them expected me to see the truth. And neither of them understood how quiet strength builds, not loudly, not suddenly, but from the steady courage of someone who has lost everything once and refuses to lose again. I'm ready, I said. Tom stood and moved to the far side of the office, where a second desk held a laptop, a locked drawer, and several neatly arranged files marked with colored tabs. He unlocked the drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it in the center of the desk. Dan joined him, his shoulders stiffening as if bracing for the next wave of revelations. I stayed seated for a moment, steadying my breath, before rising and taking a slow step toward them. This part, Tom said, was uncovered by Maya. She's a private investigator I hired when your husband realized he couldn't gather everything alone without being noticed. I nodded. Dan had mentioned her briefly, but I didn't yet understand how much she had done. Tom opened the folder, revealing a series of printed screenshots, photocopied logs, and small post-it notes filled with short, sharp observations in careful handwriting. This started when your mail stopped arriving consistently, Tom explained. At first, we wondered if it was misdelivery or human error. But Maya decided to trace the pattern. He showed me a page with dates highlighted in yellow. These were the days important mail was sent to your home. Bank statements, renewal notices, insurance paperwork, none of them reached you. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. And the mail carrier said I wasn't home, I murmured. Even when I was, Tom nodded. Maya spoke directly with him. He said someone else occasionally picked up your mail, a woman. When she described the woman, the details matched Ivy. A coldness moved through me, not surprise anymore, but the confirmation of something I had already begun to suspect. Tom continued, placing a set of small photos on the desk. They were zoomed-in images from a neighborhood security camera, grainy but unmistakable. Sam standing near the row of mailboxes on a day he claimed he'd been working late. Ivy reaching into the box the next morning. Dan exhaled slowly. They weren't just taking your mail. They were sorting it, removing anything that could contradict the story they were trying to build. I ran my finger lightly across the edge of one photograph. What about the missing receipt? The one you said they shredded? That's connected, Tom said. Maya traced a pattern of small purchases they used to justify claims that you were forgetting things. Pharmacy items, duplicate keys, small services billed under your name. But when she tried to retrieve a particular point-of-sale receipt, she found the record had been deleted. I lifted my gaze. How? Someone accessed the system at the store, Tom explained, using a phone number that matched one of Ivy's old accounts. But Maya managed to recover a fragment, just enough to show tampering. He held up a torn printout, half of a barcode still visible. They wanted the record gone because it proved she purchased something while claiming to be somewhere else. It threatened the story they were crafting. I swallowed, my throat tight. They were meticulous. Yes, Tom said. And that's why Maya went deeper. He clicked the laptop open and turned the screen toward me. A paused video clip filled the screen. a grainy hallway camera from what looked like a funeral home. A young staff member appeared briefly, glancing toward a counter, then walking out of frame. "Eddie's assistant," Dan said. He didn't understand what he saw at the time, but he remembered something the day everything unfolded. Tom clicked play. A man entered the frame carrying a small metal tin. Not a box like the one that held Dan's jacket, but something flatter, older, dented around the edges. The assistant pointed toward a sealed cabinet, and the man nodded before placing the tin inside. I stepped closer. "What is that?" "A backup," Tom said. "Your husband didn't trust digital files alone. He asked Eddie to store a physical item in case something happened to him before he could finish compiling the evidence." Dan nodded. "I didn't want it in the house." Sam had started dropping by unannounced. Ivy too. I couldn't risk them stumbling on anything. "What's inside the tin?" I asked. "That," Tom said. "We will find out soon. We have a location, but Maya needs confirmation before retrieving it. She's getting it tonight." I took a slow breath, letting the new information settle before speaking again. "You mentioned deleted files. Is that what the clerk told you?" Tom flipped to another page. "Yes, Maya interviewed a bank clerk who remembered an unusual interaction. A man came in asking if certain statements could be canceled or redirected. He tried to keep his voice low, but the clerk heard him mention your name." "And Sam paid a courier," Dan added quietly. "Cash. The clerk saw the exchange." I felt something inside me sink, then steady. The pattern was no longer abstract. It was vivid, undeniable, and chillingly thorough. Tom moved aside so I could see the final group of documents. "This is where things escalate," he said, "and this is why we have to move quickly." The pages showed timestamps from security cameras outside the pharmacy, the funeral home, the bank, and our neighborhood. A map overlapped them, pointing out routes Sam had taken repeatedly. The lines intersected in places where I had never imagined he'd been. "He was tracking you," Tom said quietly, "watching your routines, making sure he understood when you were alone, when you weren't expecting anyone, when the house was most accessible." My breath caught. I remembered the feeling, those quiet moments before sleep, those times when the house seemed to creak unnaturally, those days when the front door felt just slightly ajar even though I was certain I had locked it. I had brushed it off as grief making the familiar feel foreign. Now I saw it for what it was. Dan's voice cut gently through the silence. This wasn't just carelessness on their part. It was preparation. I closed my eyes briefly, not to hide from the truth, but to absorb it fully. When I opened them again, I found Dan and Tom watching me, waiting for my response. "I'm not afraid of the truth," I said quietly. "Not anymore." Tom nodded once, firm and approving. "Then here is what comes next. We keep gathering. We let Maya retrieve the tin. We compile everything, every document, every recording, every witness. And when the time is right, we present it where it will matter most." I rested my hand on the edge of the desk, absorbing the weight of the moment. "They spent months building a story about who they wanted me to appear to be," I said. "We'll show who they really are." Dan exhaled slowly, some tension easing from his shoulders. "You're stronger than they ever imagined." I didn't look away. They underestimated the wrong woman. The morning came with a strange, gray stillness, the kind that settles over a neighborhood before people begin their routines. I barely slept, not from fear, but from an alertness I hadn't felt in years. Every sound in the house felt sharper, the soft tick of the clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of wind against the windows. Dan slept in the small guest room at Tom's office suite, hidden until we could decide the next move. I stayed in my own home, exactly as Sam and Ivy expected. The appearance of normalcy mattered now more than ever. I made tea and stood by the kitchen window, watching the empty street. My hands stayed steady, steadier than they should have been after everything I'd learned. I thought about the evidence, the reports, the patient way they had tried to shape my life into something fragile. They wanted to make me appear unsteady. They wanted me to doubt myself. They had worked hard to craft a story that didn't belong to me. But now that I saw each piece clearly, something inside me had anchored itself. Just before 8, my phone buzzed. A legal alert from Tom appeared at the top of the screen. One line. Short, precise. Emergency petition filed. Guardianship hearing set for Monday. My breath stilled. I stared at the message, letting the words settle into place. Guardianship. A proceeding meant for people who could no longer care for themselves, who needed someone else to make decisions for them. They weren't waiting. They weren't hesitating. They were trying to force the final step. A knock came at my front door, sharp, early, purposeful. I walked across the living room and opened it. A courier stood on the porch, holding a sealed envelope stamped with the logo of a local law office. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a clipboard to sign and offered the envelope. "This is time sensitive," he said. "They asked me to deliver it personally." I thanked him, closed the door, and placed the envelope on the kitchen table. My fingers hovered for a moment. I recognized the sender, Sam's attorney. I opened it slowly, unfolded the papers, and read the formal language printed in clear black ink. A request for temporary guardianship. An affidavit claiming concerns about my mental state. Statements referencing memory issues, misplaced items, confusion. All carefully documented. All tied to the story they had been building piece by piece. My name appeared in sentences that didn't describe me at all. I read each page calmly, without letting my breath change. At the bottom, Sam's signature appeared beside Ivy's. They had filed it together. The room felt oddly silent, as if even the house was waiting for my reaction. But I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel the kind of shock I had felt in Tom's office. Instead, I felt a steadiness rising inside me. Quiet, patient, unshakable. I set the envelope down, took my coat, and stepped outside. Tom met me halfway between my house and the courthouse. His expression was grim but composed. "I came as soon as I saw the filing," he said. "They moved faster than we expected." "I'm not surprised," I answered. "They've been building toward this." "We need to be careful," Tom said. "They'll try to use everything, your grief, your shock, even your silence, as proof that you can't manage your own affairs. They may call for an immediate evaluation." "I understand." We entered the courthouse through a side entrance. The hallways were quiet. A clerk guided us to a small courtroom on the second floor. I sat at the table beside Tom, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Sam and Ivy entered moments later with their attorney. Ivy wore a soft sweater and carried tissues as if preparing for a display of compassion. Sam's shoulders were stiff, his eyes darting between me and the judge's bench. He looked nervous, not because he feared for me, but because he feared losing his grip on the plan. When Judge Cole entered, everyone rose. He carried a presence that filled the room without raising his voice. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and glanced at the stack of documents in front of him. The proceedings began quickly. Sam's attorney spoke first, using a tone meant to sound caring, almost mournful. He described me as overwhelmed, forgetful, confused. He said I had been struggling with grief and had become increasingly disoriented. He spoke as if he knew me, as if he had spent time in my home. He spoke as if my life were a fragile vase he was bravely trying to keep from breaking. Sam kept his eyes down, occasionally glancing up to see whether the judge appeared convinced. Ivy dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her tissue. Her performance was so smooth, it almost impressed me. Tom leaned forward, waiting patiently for his turn. When the attorney finished, Judge Cole turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "do you have representation?" "Yes," I replied. "Mr. Avery is with me." Tom stood. "Your Honor, my client is capable of speaking for herself if allowed, but I would like to address the court as well." Judge Cole nodded. "Proceed." Tom began calmly. "Your Honor, this petition is not based on concern. It is based on a coordinated effort to assume control of Mrs. Whitmore's financial assets. We have documentation that shows manipulation of her mail, unauthorized access to personal accounts, and interference with her medical records. We will present all of this at the appropriate time. But today, we ask that no action be taken until the evidence is reviewed fully." A murmur rippled across the small room. Sam's attorney objected immediately, his tone rising. "These accusations are outrageous. This is a grieving family trying to support an elderly woman who has shown signs of confusion." Judge Cole raised a hand. The room went silent. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I want to hear from you directly. Are you able to manage your home and your affairs?" I met his eyes steadily. "Yes, Your Honor. I manage my own finances, my home, my life. I understand what is happening around me, and I am not confused." My voice didn't tremble. It carried the weight of everything I had held inside for months. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then he made a brief note, closed the file, and spoke. "Temporary guardianship is denied. A full hearing will be scheduled after all evidence is submitted. Until then, Mrs. Whitmore retains full control of her affairs." I felt the words settle around me like a shield. Sam stiffened. Ivy's jaw tensed beneath her practiced softness. But the moment wasn't over. As we left the courtroom, Maya hurried up the hallway toward us, slightly out of breath. She carried something in her hands, a small slip of paper. "I found something," she said quietly. "Something we didn't expect. This could change everything." I took the paper, feeling the weight of what was coming next. The fight had only begun. I followed Tom and Maya into the dim hallway outside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights above us flickering softly as if even the building sensed the shift in the air. Maya handed me the small slip of paper she'd mentioned, her breath still uneven from rushing. I unfolded it slowly. It was a timestamp, a brief note, and the address of a pharmacy. But it wasn't the details that tightened my chest. It was the single line beneath it, written in the quick, slanted handwriting Maya used during urgent moments. "Footage recovered. Sam followed you Monday night." My pulse stilled. I remembered Monday clearly. I had driven to the pharmacy to pick up a bottle of pain reliever. I had felt eyes on me that night. I had brushed it off as grief. Now I knew better. "Is the footage clear?" I asked. Maya nodded. "Clear enough. His car stayed behind yours almost the entire time. Same route, same turns. He stopped when you did. He waited. And then he left only after you got home." I looked at Tom. His face had shifted into something sharper, more alert. "This confirms intent," he said. "Pattern, motive, proximity, everything we've suspected is becoming visible. And that's not all," Maya added, lowering her voice. "There's something else I found. Something I wasn't expecting." We stepped into an empty conference room nearby. Tom closed the door behind us. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and paper files, the kind of scent that settles in places where secrets linger too long. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "This came from the funeral home," she said. "From Eddie's assistant. He remembered a conversation, and when he saw the footage of Sam near the office earlier this month, he started to connect things. He went through his old files and found a backup he didn't realize he'd created. He handed it to me an hour ago." I held the flash drive in my hand. It felt impossibly small for something that could shift the course of my life. "What's on it?" I asked. "Security footage," Maya said. "From the night Ivy came by the funeral home after hours. She told Eddie she wanted to pick up paperwork for you, but she never mentioned it again. The footage shows her searching the office. She opened drawers. She checked the cabinet where Dan's tin was stored." My breath caught, a slow inward pull that tightened my ribs. She was looking for whatever Dan left behind. "Exactly," Maya said. "And this drive shows it." Tom placed his hand on the table, leaning in. "If they were trying to get their hands on evidence before anyone else could, it means they knew they were running out of time. This strengthens your case significantly." I sank into a chair. My limbs felt heavy, but my mind felt painfully awake. They weren't just suspicious. They were desperate. Maya nodded. "Desperate people make mistakes, and they made several." I looked between them. "What happens now?" Tom took the flash drive from my hand. "We document this. We preserve it. And then we use it. But for the moment, we need you home. Safe, quiet, predictable. They can't know anything has changed." I understood. Every move I made now mattered. I left the courthouse with Maya walking a short distance behind me, as if she were simply another person in the crowd. Tom disappeared down a side hall, heading to meet an IT specialist who could extract and secure the footage. Outside, the sky had darkened with heavy clouds. The air smelled of rain. I walked to my car slowly, feeling the weight of every footstep. Before opening the door, I paused and looked across the parking lot. There, several cars away, Sam leaned against the hood of his sedan. He was pretending to check his phone, but his eyes flicked up sharply the moment I turned my head. He straightened. For a moment, neither of us moved. He took a step toward me. "Mom," he said, lifting a hand. "Wait." I didn't answer. I simply watched him. His shoulders slumped slightly at my silence. Something in his expression flickered. Fear, exhaustion, maybe a faint hint of regret. But beneath it all was something harder to forgive. Calculation. "I just want to talk," he said. "You left in a hurry earlier. I didn't know what was going on." "You knew exactly what was going on," I replied softly. He stopped walking. The rain began to fall in thin lines, tapping softly against the pavement. "Mom, please," he said, lowering his voice. "This is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to help you." I opened my car door slowly. Help doesn't come with secret filings. Help doesn't come with following someone at night. He froze. His eyes widened, just enough to reveal the truth. He knew I knew. "Mom," he whispered, "I can explain." "You already have," I said. "By your actions." I got into the car, closed the door, and locked it. Sam took one step forward, then another, but a security guard emerged from the entrance of the building, and Sam hesitated. The rain thickened, streaking across my windshield. I started the engine and pulled away without looking back. The drive home felt strangely calm. The rain softened the world into a muted haze, and the steady rhythm against the roof steadied my own heartbeat. By the time I reached my house, the storm had grown heavier. I parked, stepped out, and let the rain touch my face for a moment before going inside. The house felt different now. Not safer, not warmer, but mine. Completely mine. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and stood in the center of the living room. The quiet held me like a cloak. They wanted to make me small. They wanted to make me uncertain. They wanted to reshape me into someone who couldn't stand on her own. But they had forgotten something. A quiet woman is not a weak woman. A still voice is not a silent one. And the moment I stopped doubting myself was the moment they began to lose. My phone vibrated. A message from Tom. Be ready. Tonight changes everything. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the rain steady me. I was ready. Night settled over the neighborhood in a slow, deliberate hush, the kind that presses against the windows and makes every distant sound feel closer. I sat in my living room with only a floor lamp lit, watching the shadows of rain glide down the glass. My phone rested on the coffee table, screen dark, until it vibrated with a single message. We found the tin. On our way. And my bun slipped on my sweater. The one Dan always said made me look calmer than I felt, and sat near the front door. My heartbeat didn't race. It moved with a steady rhythm, shaped by the quiet strength that had carried me this far. The house creaked softly, shifting with the storm. I didn't turn on any more lights. It felt right to meet whatever was coming in the same dim calmness that had carried me through the truth. A car pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later. I recognized the silhouette through the frosted window. Maya's small sedan, followed by Tom's darker car. I unlocked the door just as they stepped onto the porch. Rain beaded on their coats. Between them, Maya held a dented metal tin, wrapped in a clear evidence bag. Let's go inside, Tom said. We shouldn't open it out here. I led them to the dining table. The three of us stood around it for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Then Maya carefully unsealed the bag and set the tin in the center of the table. It looked unremarkable. Old, scratched, slightly bent on one corner, but the weight of it felt enormous. This was hidden in an upper cabinet at the funeral home, Maya said. Eddie didn't put it there. Someone else did. And no one touched it again. I touched the lid gently. It was cold. Dan said he left something behind. Something physical. Something he didn't trust to keep at home. Tom nodded. Open it whenever you're ready. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of paper, sat a small flash drive and several folded sheets. The drive was labeled with Dan's handwriting. Sloan Transfers. The papers beneath were thinner, worn at the edges, as if he'd handled them many times. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of seeing the truth my husband had carried alone. Let's start with the papers, Tom said. I unfolded them slowly. The first sheet was a photocopy of a bank withdrawal slip. $10,000. Cash. Signed by Dr. Victor Sloan. A transaction dated only days before Dan's staged death. The next page held a screenshot of a message thread between Ivy and an unknown contact. The language was precise, coded only in the way inexperienced people try to be secretive. He said he'll sign it after the evaluation, Ivy had written. We just need that letter. Underneath it, the sender replied. Money confirmed. Tell him Tuesday. My pulse tightened, though my breathing remained calm. Maya leaned in. And here, she said, sliding a printed transcript forward, is the part that changes everything. It was a voicemail message. My eyes moved slowly across the words as I read. Ivy, I'm at the clinic. He wants the rest today, or he's not signing anything. You said you'd handle it. Don't make me look desperate. The timestamp placed the message at the exact time Sam claimed he'd been driving me to lunch last month. Desperate. The word echoed through me, heavy and sharp. We pulled the audio from the flash drive, Maya said. Your husband copied it directly before he disappeared. The drive also contains video that links the payments to Dr. Sloan's personal account. And once the DA sees this, Tom added, they'll have more than enough to investigate. I exhaled slowly. They thought they erased everything. They missed the one thing they couldn't reach, Maya said, tapping the tin gently. Your husband planned ahead. There was more inside the tin. A folded envelope. My name written in Dan's careful handwriting. My throat tightened instantly. I touched it but didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I looked at the flash drive. Can we see what's on it? Tom nodded and connected it to his laptop. The screen flickered, then displayed a list of files. Several were labeled with dates. One read, Transfer Footage MP4. He clicked. A grainy video filled the screen. A cramped office hallway. Dr. Sloan slipping an envelope into his coat pocket. Then, seconds later, Sam appearing from the opposite direction. The two men exchanged a brief handshake before walking in opposite paths. The video ended abruptly, but the implication was unmistakable. He said he would never meet Sam, I whispered. Tom answered quietly. He met him more than once. The second video file opened on its own, as if cued intentionally. It showed Ivy in the clinic waiting room, checking her watch, scrolling on her phone, then stepping into a consultation room without being called. The file name appeared again at the bottom, handoff.move. I didn't need the audio. The images were enough. When the last file closed, the room went quiet. Rain beat against the windows harder now, as if the storm itself wanted to punctuate the gravity of what lay before us. Maya reached for her notebook. And there's something else you need to know, she said. When I spoke to the bank clerk this afternoon, he hesitated at first. But when I showed him one of the screenshots in Dan's folder, he recognized Sam immediately. My breath caught. Recognized him? He said he saw Sam try to intercept your bank mail, and when the clerk told him it couldn't be canceled that way, Sam stepped outside with someone the clerk didn't recognize, and paid him cash. My pulse quickened. Paid a courier. Yes, Maya said. And that courier is tied to a boutique partner Ivy has worked with before. The DA will want to speak to both of them. They didn't cover their tracks as well as they thought. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the truth settling into something that felt less like pain and more like quiet, controlled purpose. They didn't just plan to take my life, I said softly. They rehearsed it. Tom closed the tin, his expression steady. Now we rehearse something of our own, something stronger. I looked out, at the dark windows, at the reflection of my own face, lined but composed, quiet, but far from broken. I thought of Sam's frightened eyes in the parking lot, Ivy's steady lies wrapped in soft smiles, their hands shaping a story that didn't belong to them. They won't see this coming, I said. No, Tom agreed. They won't. Maya gathered her notes, her voice firm. Tomorrow morning, we take this to the DA. Tonight, stay home. Keep your lights low. And if anything feels wrong, call immediately. I nodded. After they left, the house sank into silence again. I stood in the center of the living room, holding the unopened envelope with my name on it. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm. My hands no longer trembled. Dan had hidden this truth to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect myself. Morning arrived with a pale, muted light that settled over my kitchen like a thin veil. I stood by the window, watching the neighborhood wake slowly, the newspaper hitting a driveway, a garage door rising, the soft rumble of a truck pulling away. Everything looked ordinary, almost peaceful. But nothing about this day was ordinary. By the time the sun rose fully, the evidence from the tin had already begun to reshape the ground beneath all of us. Tom picked me up just after 8. He insisted we use his car instead of mine. "They're watching for changes," he said. "Predictability is our protection. Today, you're just spending time with your attorney." His reassurance helped, but the knot in my stomach stayed firm. Not fear, anticipation. When we arrived at the courthouse annex, Maya was already waiting outside with a slim folder tucked beneath her arm. She looked alert, sharp, ready. "The DA reviewed the files I sent overnight," she said as we walked inside. "He moved us to the earliest slot this morning." I nodded, grateful for her quiet efficiency. With every step, I felt myself settling deeper into a calm I hadn't known I possessed. A calm that came from clarity, from truth, from the steady grounding of someone who finally sees the road ahead. The hearing room wasn't large, but it carried the weight of every decision made within its walls. Judge Cole sat at the bench, already reviewing paperwork when we entered. His expression was unreadable, but something about the way he straightened his glasses told me he expected the morning to be significant. Sam and Ivy entered just as we took our seats. Ivy wore a soft cardigan and held a leather folder to her chest, her gaze shifting quickly around the room. Sam looked pale, his jaw tight, his hands restless. For the first time, he didn't look determined. He looked cornered. Judge Cole opened the session with a steady voice. "We are reconvening to address additional materials submitted overnight regarding the petition filed by Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove." He raised one eyebrow. "It appears substantial." Tom stood. "Your Honor, we have obtained physical evidence documenting a coordinated effort to manipulate Mrs. Whitmore's financial and medical records. This includes payments made to a physician, conversations suggesting intent to control assets, intercepted mail, and video recordings showing unauthorized access to private property." Sam shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward the exit for a fraction of a second before landing back on the judge. Ivy gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles pale. Judge Cole gestured. "Proceed." Maya stepped forward, opening the slim folder she had carried. "Your Honor, this is a compilation of verified footage, banking records, and witness statements." She placed the first exhibit on the table. "This video shows Dr. Sloan receiving cash after signing a medical evaluation claiming Mrs. Whitmore was experiencing cognitive decline. The funds were traced to an account connected to the Hargroves." A low murmur rose from the back of the room. Another page was placed before the judge. "This transcript details a recorded message sent by Mrs. Hargrove requesting a falsified evaluation." She set down the next page. "This is a bank slip documenting a transfer made by Dr. Sloan shortly after the meeting." Judge Cole examined each document carefully, his expression tightening with each new piece. Maya continued. "This footage shows Mrs. Hargrove entering the funeral home after hours. She searched the filing cabinets containing personal property that did not belong to her." Ivy's breath hitched. That's taken out of context. I was helping prepare." Judge Cole held up a hand. Ivy fell silent. Maya placed another slip of paper on the table. This is testimony from a bank clerk who witnessed Mr. Hargrove attempting to reroute financial mail belonging to his mother. He also witnessed Mr. Hargrove handing cash to a courier who later emerged in an unrelated boutique transaction connected to Mrs. Hargrove. Sam's face shifted from pale to drained. His shoulders curled inward as if the evidence pressed directly against his ribs. Tom stepped forward again. "Your Honor, these materials form a clear pattern. This wasn't concern. It wasn't compassion. It was preparation for control of assets, executed through deception, financial manipulation, and medical interference." Judge Cole leaned back, studying both sides. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, his voice even, "do you wish to respond?" Sam swallowed, his throat working visibly. I was trying to help her. She wasn't remembering things. She was stressed. We didn't want her to make mistakes." "And the payments to Dr. Sloan?" the judge asked. Ivy told me." His voice cracked. "We just needed certainty." Judge Cole looked to Ivy. "Mrs. Hargrove?" She lifted her chin slightly. "We were acting in the family's best interest. Karen has been under enormous pressure. She needed guidance. We were only trying to..." "To what?" the judge asked. "Take her home? Take her finances? Take autonomy she has not lost?" A long silence filled the room. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Everything they had done had finally announced itself in their own voices. Judge Cole closed the folder. "Given the evidence presented, I am denying the petition permanently. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for review of possible criminal conduct involving fraud, coercion, and interference with legal documents." I saw the moment the words hit Sam. His whole frame sagged. Ivy's eyes widened, the softness on her face dissolving into something sharp, startled, unguarded. She reached for Sam's arm. He didn't lift his hand to meet hers. "And one more thing," Judge Cole added, his tone measured. "Mrs. Whitmore has shown nothing but clarity, composure, and integrity throughout these proceedings. She remains the legal authority over her home and financial property." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Not a triumphant breath, a steady one, the kind that comes from reclaiming something quietly stolen. The judge dismissed the room. As we stood, Ruth entered from the hallway. She walked straight to the bench, greeted the judge respectfully, then turned toward us. "I was asked to come in," she said softly, her warm eyes meeting mine. "They wanted someone with first-hand knowledge of the family dynamic." Tom nodded. "Your statement reinforced the timeline." Ruth touched my hand gently. "I told them what I saw. The night Sam raised his voice, the days Ivy checked your mailbox. They needed someone from the outside to say it plainly." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you." As we walked out of the courtroom, Sam remained sitting, elbows on his knees, his hands covering his face. Ivy stood beside him, frozen in place, her expression emptied of its usual calm. They didn't look at me. They didn't speak. They simply felt the weight of their own choices settling at last. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight warmed the pavement. Dan stepped from a waiting room down the hall and caught my eye. It was still dangerous for him to be seen, but for a brief moment we stood close enough to share a quiet understanding. "What happens now?" I asked Tom. "We prepare for whatever comes next," he said. "But for today, you walk home with your dignity intact." I stepped into the sunlight, letting the warmth find my skin. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but today, truth had spoken. 6 months later, the air felt different. It carried a gentleness I hadn't known in a long time, something quiet, warm, almost forgiving. Our new home sat on a quiet stretch of redwood springs, where the sunrise softened everything it touched. I stood on the porch that morning with a cup of coffee cupped between my palms, watching light spill over the small garden Dan had planted the week we moved in. He always said roses needed time before they showed you who they were. A bit like people, he'd add with a half smile. And this morning, a single bloom had opened, soft pink, edges tipped with the faintest white. It felt like a sign of sorts, not from the past, but from the life we had begun building quietly in its wake. Dan stepped onto the porch with a slow stretch. The months had been kind to him. The weight of the secrets he once carried had eased from his shoulders. His steps were lighter now. He set a tin watering can beside the roses, and for a moment we simply stood together, letting the morning settle around us. "You slept better last night," he said gently. "I did," I replied. "It feels like the house exhales when the sun rises." He smiled at that, touching the leaves of the newest rosebush. "It's peaceful here. It suits you." There was no need for more words. We had lived through enough noise already. Inside, a stack of boxes still waited in the spare room, mostly old things, photographs, and a few personal documents from the life we had stepped out of. I kept one box separate from the rest. The tin. The one Dan had hidden at the funeral home. It no longer held evidence or danger. Now it held memories. A folded copy of his old notes. The envelope he wrote to me. A small dried rose petal from our last home. And the letter I would write to myself at the end of this day. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I set my coffee down and opened the screen door just as footsteps approached the walkway. Slow, familiar, heavy with intention. Sam. He stood at the edge of the steps, hair damp from the morning drizzle, eyes shadowed in a way I had never seen before. Not the old shadow of shame that once drove him to denial, but the softer, heavier weight of consequence. He didn't step onto the porch. He waited. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet, gentle in a way that made the air around us still. I nodded slowly. "Hello, Sam." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Dan stepped inside, giving us space. I could feel him watching from the hallway, ready but not interfering. The decision of this moment belonged to me. Sam cleared his throat. I got a letter from the DA's office. They're still working through everything. They said there might be a hearing in the fall." I nodded. "I know. I'm cooperating," he added quickly. "I'm telling them everything. Even things they didn't ask about, I thought you should know." I took in his posture, the slump of his shoulders, the shake in his hands. He wasn't hiding behind excuses. He wasn't trying to rewrite anything. He took a slow breath. "Mom, I'm sorry." Rain held its breath on the edge of the gutter. Another sigh left him, heavy and uneven. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not here to ask for it. I needed to say it to your face. I needed you to hear me." I stepped closer but stayed on the porch, the wooden boards cool beneath my feet. "Why now?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Because every excuse I made fell apart. Because I hurt the one person who never stopped helping me. And because when the truth came out, you still didn't scream. You didn't try to ruin my life the way I almost ruined yours." His voice cracked. "I don't know how to live with that," he whispered. I looked at my son, the child I once carried, the boy who once reached for my hand in crowded grocery stores, the man who tried to take my autonomy piece by piece. All of him existed in that moment. "I can't erase what you did," I said. and you have to face what comes next. But I hear your words, Sam, and I'm not closing the door on you forever." Tears slipped down his cheek. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "That's more than I deserve." I didn't reach for him. He didn't move toward me. But there was something there, a line drawn between us, not as a punishment, but as a boundary, a place where healing might begin, quietly, carefully. He stepped back onto the walkway. "I'll let you be. I just wanted you to know." He started to turn, but paused. "Your new place is beautiful," he said softly. "I'm glad you're safe." Then he walked away, disappearing down the quiet street. I waited until he was gone before stepping back inside. Dan was leaning against the hallway wall, his eyes gentle. "How do you feel?" he asked. I exhaled slowly. "Like a door opened," I said. "Not all the way, but enough to let a little air in." Dan nodded. "That's enough." I walked to the small desk near the window and opened the tin. The metal was warm from the morning sun. Inside, the envelope Dan wrote me months ago rested where I'd placed it. Beneath it, I added a new sheet of paper. I sat down and began writing a letter to myself. Quiet words, soft truths, gentle reminders of who I was before the storm and who I had chosen to become after. When I finished, I folded the letter and slipped it into the tin alongside Dan's. Closure, I realized, wasn't a moment. It was a collection of small, steady breaths, a decision you made repeatedly, gently, day after day. I closed the tin and placed it on the shelf beside the window, where the morning light turned the metal warm and golden. Then I stepped onto the porch again, letting the breeze lift the edges of my sweater. Dan joined me, handing me a second cup of coffee. The roses swayed softly in the wind, petals opening toward the sun. I looked out across our quiet street, then into the camera of the life we had rebuilt. And with a steady voice, I asked the question that always brought people closer, always turned strangers into companions, always reminded me that healing never happens alone. "Where are you watching from?"